From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub Podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Good morning, security gang, and welcome to another episode of the CyberHub Podcast Practitioner Brief. It's Wednesday, December 21st, only 3 short days from Christmas, third night of Hanukkah last night, and what a wonderful time of year this is for everyone. So thank y'all for taking some time. I know a lot of you are checking out for the rest of the year, heading on vacation with your family and folks. So I do appreciate our numbers have actually gone up this week. So typically we see some sort of plateau, but thank y'all for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. Please make sure to subscribe, follow us on your favorite podcast listening platform. Go check out our YouTube channel, and definitely check out our website at cyberhubpodcast.com. A new season of CISO Talks right around the corner, by the way. I'm recording some really awesome episodes. Very excited about what y'all are going to be getting here in January with that new season. After a year break, I feel way more refreshed, and I think our content's going to be on point this year as well. So tune in for that. Packed show today. And I mean like really, really packed, right? And what I mean by packed, I mean really, really packed. So we've got Okta news from Okta, JFK news, and so much more. We're going to get into all of that here in just a moment. But before we do, our ceremonial cup of coffee, if it's your first time tuning in, my double espresso, whatever you're drinking this morning, we say coffee cup cheers here at CyberHub Podcast. Good morning to Avishai. Good morning to Balrup as well. Good morning to both of y'all for tuning in on LinkedIn for our live show. Let's start with our first story of the day. A new ransomware is using a new exploit to bypass the ProxyNotShell mitigation. So if you've been living under a rock, ProxyShell or ProxyNotShell consists of two different security defects in Microsoft Exchange. CVE 2022-41040, which is a server-side request forgery bug, has a 8.8 CVSS score, and CVE 2022-41082, a remote code execution flaw with a CVSS score of 8.0. The two vulnerabilities were initially reported in September when they were already being exploited in attacks. Microsoft addressed those as part of its November 2022 patch on Patch Tuesday security updates. But the exploit chain now has a new bypass method for threat actors. So while there's some mitigation behind this, organizations who've used the mitigation should immediately patch their systems. Otherwise, the mitigation that was recommended is now being bypassed. They're seeing it in live attacks as well. So you want to make sure you get those patched. Okta is having a year to forget. I mean, really a year to forget. They've had multiple security incidents, and I put out a post a few months ago, and I said, identity is the new endpoint. It's where everything is going. And I was just kind of reading the tea leaves based on a lot of threat intel I was watching at the time and reading upon. And this is the confirmation of that. The Okta source code was stolen after GitHub repositories were hacked. Okta overnight sent an email, a confidential email internally that was leaked out and sent to Bleeping Computer. Bleeping Computer has confirmed this email to be true. Let's pull it up here. It's an Okta advisory to the Okta security contacts, essentially claiming that there's been no suspicious access to any customer data or any Okta service. However, the Okta code repositories were hacked, copied in GitHub. And GitHub was actually who alerted Okta to the fact that their entire source code repository was copied, which seemed probably something that's not something you would do traditionally. So good job by GitHub, one of being a really good partner there on the security side. Okta is saying that the incident is relevant to the Okta Workforce Identity Cloud Code repositories and not the Auth0 Customer Identity Cloud product, given the email wording. As soon as Okta learned of the possible suspicious access, they promptly placed temporary restrictions on access to the Okta GitHub repositories and suspended all GitHub integration with third-party application. They have since reviewed all recent access to Okta software repositories hosted by GitHub to understand the scope of the exposure, reviewed all recent commits to Okta software repositories hosted with GitHub to validate the integrity of the code, and rotated GitHub credentials. They've also notified law enforcement. Additionally, we've taken steps to ensure that this code cannot be used to access company or customer environment. Okta does not anticipate any disruptions to the business or their ability, and this only pertains to the Okta Workforce Identity Cloud. If that's something you are using, you're likely somewhat impacted. Okta's had multiple security incidents this year, including several ransomware attacks as well as several data breaches. I'll tell you, I'm uneasy if I'm an Okta customer today. Just saying, uneasy. Not judging here, right? Because this stuff does happen. But if you're a security company and you're first line of defense, you're on the actor's radar, threat actor radar, no different than we are. And so, something to keep in mind here. But this is a big deal for Okta, and the impacts of this could be similar to SolarWinds and Microsoft. If you think of what happened in SolarWinds allowed threat actors to get access to the Microsoft source code, and then we had 9 months worth of Microsoft 0 days. 9 months worth. So could there be 0 days in the Okta code? Could those vulnerabilities be taken advantage of and impact customers? Those questions still remain very open, but whoever took this source code knows what they're doing. Let's just leave it at that. There's a critical vulnerability in the Hikvision wireless bridges, which allows CCTV hacking. The Chinese video surveillance company Hikvision, I believe, has patched a critical vulnerability in some of its wireless bridge products. The flaw can lead to remote CCTV hacking. According to the researchers who found this is known as CVE 2022-28173, a critical access control vulnerability. It's been patched. If you are using these devices within your environments, you want to make sure that whoever manages that product gets it patched immediately. The Raspberry Robin worm is targeting telcos and government. It's got 10 layers of obfuscations and fake payloads. The Raspberry Robin worm is nesting its way into organizations. It's likely the group that's behind the worm, Raspberry Robin, that's testing the waters, launching attacks against telcos and governments across Australia, Europe, and Latin America to see how far their malware can spread. For now, researchers at Trend Micro have been tracking Raspberry Robin since September of this year and are warning the worm is notable for its 10 layers of obfuscation and its ability to deploy a fake payload to throw off detection efforts. Raspberry Robin infected thousands of endpoints in October. Both October's endpoints attacks and the latest targeting of government and telecom sectors relied on a malicious USB for initial infection. The initial analysis of the malware, which compromised a number of organizations towards the end of September, showed that while the main malware routine contains both the real and fake payloads, it loads the fake payload once it detects sandboxing tools to evade security and analytics tools from detecting and setting the malware's real routine. So they're kind of creating their own little honeypot within the malware, sending us on a wild goose chase while they go out and do the work on the back end. Something very dangerous and something to keep an eye on and talk to your security partners about. Criminals are bombarding the PyPI platform with information, stealing malware. We just literally did a story about it this week. The PyPI, which is the Python package repository, is being bombarded by a wave of information stealing malware, hiding inside malicious packages uploaded to the platform to steal software developer data. The malware dropped in this campaign is a clone of the open source W4SP stealer responsible for a previous widespread infection on PyPI just last month. Since then, an additional 31 packages dropping W4SP have been removed from the PyPI repository. And yesterday we had a similar story as well. So kind of starting to catch on. They're targeting your developers. They're going after code. And that's really something that should be if it's not a focus, it should be a focus going into January. Should be something you spend time thinking about. How do we start to create some sort of checks? Who can help us in identifying which are good repos to use and which are bad repositories to use? And those are going to be really critical for the success going forward of security in organizations. And finally, our final story of the day. Well, New York's yellow taxis are obviously, some of the most iconic taxi systems, but hacking the taxi dispatch system at JFK Airport for a $10 loot just seems stupid. So the suspects, Daniel Abayev and Peter Lehman, both residing in New York, hacked the dispatch system at JFK to make modifications so that certain taxi drivers would be sent to the front of the line. And for those who don't know, taxi drivers typically go into a hold lot. They're dispatched first come, first served basis. As passengers come out looking for a taxi, they kind of flow them through. Here, they were making it possible for taxis to skip the line for a $10 charge each time they did that. So, you're talking about hundreds or maybe thousands of dollars a day in some of those cases. This was done with cooperation from their Russian counterparts, apparently. The cybercrime operation started in 2019 and included bribing someone to deploy malware onto the dispatch system's computers using a flash drive, gaining unauthorized access to the system through a Wi-Fi attack, and then stealing tablets connected to the dispatch system. Though the scheme, which ran until September of last year, the hackers made about 1,000 fraudulent expedited taxi trips per day, meaning they've made about $100,000 and sent some of that money to Russia. They're charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. And so, insider threat, folks. Insider threat. That's all that was. That was, we were at an event. And Ken Foster and Ken Foster shared something on stage, and Ken will be on the new season of CISO Talk, by the way, probably something we'll talk about on the show. He brought up and he said something very interesting. He said they did a study and from insider risk, who poses the greatest risk from a income perspective. So the study says 75,000 and below, 60% will sell their credentials or plug in a USB port for a payment of anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000. And that number goes much higher if they make under 40,000. So keep that in mind. This is probably all this was. This was just good old school social engineering to get this to be successful. And, they were making about 1,000 of these a day. So, they're making $100,000 a day. Not too shabby. For the work they were doing, but every crime has a sentence, and they're now in jail, awaiting charges. So there's that, folks. That's it for the show today. We'll be back tomorrow to wrap up this week. Next week, I'll be kind of going through, unless something really breaks next week. Next week's shows will really be going through some of the notable stories this year. I'm not going to do what do we expect in 2023? I feel like those are, fun, but they really don't add value based on a few surveys I've done actually, and then some feedback I've gotten. So we'll be doing that. Thank y'all for tuning in. The show went a little bit longer than I wanted it to, but appreciate y'all. Please make sure to subscribe and stay cyber safe.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.